Good evening and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. This is a show that is dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, other forms of rock music. So, tonight it's my album challenge, or Ben's album challenge, which is the show. This is a show that one of my subscribers, Ben, he puts forth an album by a band, usually something I haven't heard before or haven't been exposed too much to, and I basically listen to it, talk about the album, talk about what I like, what I don't like, and he usually likes me to pick my favorite song, which is usually not too hard. There's usually at least one track on the album I like quite a bit. Haven't had too many albums where that hasn't been the case. So today we're talking about a so-called, I don't think of them as a heavy metal band, but they call them a heavy metal band, and we're talking about a band called Diamond Head, and the album we're going to be talking about by them is Borrowed Time. I'm just going to give a little bit of vital statistics here on their album. So this album was released March the 12th, 1982. The Playground Studios in London, of course, 42 minutes in length, roughly, on the MCA label. This is, I think, their first album on a major label. And it was produced by Mike Hedges and Diamond Head themselves. So we'll just jump ahead here. I just wanted to go over the personnel. So the personnel appearing on here: Sean Harris on vocals, backing vocals, percussion, and vocoder. Brian Tate, guitars and backing vocals. Oh, sorry. I don't know why I said Tate. It's Tadler. Brian Tadler on guitars and backing vocals. Colin Kimberly on bass, Taurus pedals, or Taurus bass pedals if you prefer, backing vocals as well. And then Duncan Scott on drums and percussion. I think we're pretty much done with this, so get rid of it so that it doesn't screw up my screen like it tends to do. Okay, sorry, I'm putting my feet against the desk, which is moving everything, so I've moved my feet away. You shouldn't have any more issues. Okay, so this album, I listened to it in its entirety. It's a bit dated sounding. It definitely sounds like that 80s metal, the stuff that they called metal, that I don't really think of as metal, but I guess it's, in a way, I guess it's metal. It's just not the metal that I've come to think of as metal. Pretty hard album. Lots of heavy guitar, beefy guitar, lots of riffing on the album. I think that there's some really well orchestrated tunes here. Production's good on the album. Sound is very clear. A couple things about it that are a little bit different. It tends to be like very metal sounding, but not as heavy as a lot of metal. But it does have a one track on there that kind of, all of a sudden it just goes into this real kind of bluesy sound, which is different. You know, it's pretty different. The vocalist is the big issue for me here. He has a very notable voice. I think he's a very good front man. He has a strong voice. It's very notable in that, to me, when I listen to it, it's going to sound weird, but it sounds like Cher. He has that same kind of vocal range that she has. And when I listen to him, not all the time, but quite a bit of the time, I'd say probably maybe 40 to 50% of the time, he sings through his nose or through his nasal. Doesn't come across as nasally sounding, but it definitely gives that Cher sound to it. She has that kind of strong, kind of a deep, almost masculine voice in some areas, but definitely feminine. He, on the other hand, sounds a little bit more like her than a lot of females would sound like her. I actually kind of like this part about him. I think it's unique. It's quite different, and I always wondered what she would sound like in a heavy metal band, and I think he does a good job of sounding like her in a lot of tunes. It's not every tune. Some tunes he has that really kind of, his voice kind of breaks when it gets to the upper edge and gets kind of raspy. And when it gets that raspy part to it, it kind of gives it gives it that real kind of metal flair. But yeah, he's a solid vocalist. He does do some screaming. There's a couple tracks where he does some screaming on. It's not, I don't think of it as screeching. There's certain guys sing in the rock genre who scream, and they're quite good at it. And then your other guys who just screeching, and it's just like a banshee wail. Well, he's not part of that wail. He has a good scream. It does sound a little bit dated. Their music is kind of very commercial sounding. I would say this is like kind of glam metal or pop metal, but 80s style. Has that kind of Rat feel to it, or it's definitely not a metal sound like Iron Maiden. It's not a metal sound like even like Def Leppard. Like the Def Leppard, it's closer to the Def Leppard sound, but to me it's that kind of Anvil kind of. No, maybe Anvil's a bad one for an example. There is one that's floating around my what's the name of that band? Yeah, come back to me. But anyways, they definitely fit into that genre of metal. I don't want to say hair metal because I think I have that feeling. I know what hair metal sounds like, and they don't really quite fit that. Their music is too progressive. The lyrics are too good. The overall sound is is polished, but has a raw edge to the polished part to it. They're a better band than most of those hair metal bands, and they have a really great vocalist. The guitar player is good. Bass player does do some stuff here that's pretty good. Drummer's a little bit ordinary, I think, but overall solid band. Really not my style of music, but it's not a bad style either. There's at least 2 tracks on here I like. I like enough to listen to. The other tracks are a little bit unmemorable to me, but overall not a bad album. So it has 7 tracks on it. The last 3 I think are 7 minutes in length. So there is a real kind of move towards progressive element here. The album cover is fantastic, I think. Definitely has that metal flair to it. It's almost a hawk-like dragon opening with a set of stairs going into it. It's like it's going into a cliff. So definitely gives that kind of fantasy, that real kind of fantasy feel to the album. The vocals, like I said, are the best part of this album, I think. His vocals, he has several different types of styles to his vocals. He's very commercial sounding for the most part. I love the Cher sound. The Cher range that he's in, and the way his voice kind of makes me think of her when he sings. But he does do a couple of ranges where he's kind of very raspy, and that raspy part just gives it that edge, that real bite to the album. Okay, so I'm just going to go over some of the tracks a bit, not too much. The opening song, Heat of the Night, pretty heavy guitars. And the vocals are strong on this as well. Nothing real notable about the album, about this particular track. The same with the second track, To Heaven from Hell. Again, some heavy guitars. It has this kind of simple rhythm beats that goes on, and then there's this heavy solo that comes in at some point during that song as well. I like the frontalness of his voice again. Very dominating voice. I think he's I've never heard of him before, but he's a pretty strong vocalist. Call Me is the next song. It's a little bit, it's heavy, but it's not as heavy as some of the other the first 2 tracks. It's got its real kind of a softy sound to it. Almost it's a commercial sounding song. Not one of my favorites. Same as the song comes after. To me, these are the 2 weakest songs on the album. Lightning to the Nations. It's got a kind of real kind of a slower kind of start to it, and then it jumps up. The volume jumps up, and the vocals again are soaring and strong. I think he's the reason I think this band is where they were. They could have been a better band, I think. I don't know anything about the rest of their discography, but this album is not a bad start. Now, I know they had a previous album to this. A little bit of reading, I suggested that it was more of a kind of a demo album, and actually some of the tracks from that album appear on this one, which the fans of this band complained that they didn't need to put them on. So, anyways, the next song, Borrowed Time, which is the title track of the album. Another heavy song. Yeah, this one starts out with this kind of heavy bass part. So it's got this kind of heavy bass going on, and then he lets out this scream, which is really good. Like he's got a good scream. His voice didn't break during the scream, which is good. Tends to be kind of falsetto in his singing, generally speaking. But a pretty solid tune. The next tune, Don't You Ever Leave Me. Another strong vocal performance here. Like, he doesn't really have any bad vocal performances on this album. The guitar solo is probably the best guitar solo on this album, and it's a fairly lengthy one too. It's not like a short 10-minute Ace Frehley thing. It goes on at length here for a bit of time. And then it kind of drifts, the song kind of drifts towards this kind of bluesy sound, and it's almost like a different song. It doesn't just pass into it, though. It's not this heavy sound and then drops off and it's a bluesy song. It just kind of passes slowly into it, just fades into it, and then next thing it's in a bluesy song. And his voice on the bluesy song is pretty strong. I liked it. Then we got the last track on the album, which was the other track that the fans of the album, I think, felt that it didn't need to be on here because it was on the first album, which the band insists was a demo album and wasn't supposed to be a first album. It just came out that way. So this should have been actually their debut, because it's coming out. It's the first one, I think, that came out on their major label, which is MCA. I think that's what they were on. And it's called I Am Evil, a classic kind of guitar drum solo. So this beat that they start out with goes on for a minute or a minute and a half. Is a very classic beat sound that a lot of bands use, putting the drums and the guitar together. It's a very recognizable beat. Almost a little too recognizable. Sounds almost plagiarized in some ways, but I don't think it is. But very kind of a thin, kind of a Twisted Sister. Not that it doesn't sound like Twisted Sister, but it has that kind of Twisted Sister kind of vibe to it. Then it jumps up and it does this riff that goes on. It's really catchy. It's almost a Sabbath style riff. Yeah, very Sabbath. This is the first song on the album where I get that kind of feel that they're like, that the first band that comes to mind is Sabbath. They have that Tony Iommi kind of slow, melodic kind of hammering of the guitar, beefy guitar sound to it. And then, it's a real catchy riff. I like it. So this, back to the Cher vocals, like I made a note about this because I wanted to be able to discuss it a little bit at length here. So he has this range. Cher has this kind of, she controls her voice and kind of sings through the top of her head here and a little bit into her nasal area. And he has that sound, and you hear it when he says the song Borrowed Time. Instead of saying borrowed, which is what the word is, it's borrowed time. And that really, that the way he sings that really comes across in that kind of shared tone. So I wanted to give an example of where I was hearing that. And there's lots of examples of that. This is just one I wrote down. So overall, I would say this is a pretty solid, if you like heavy metal and you like that kind of classic 80s sound and you like this isn't hair metal, you're not going to mistake this, but it's definitely has that similar sound somewhere in between Def Leppard and maybe, and I still can't remember this band that I'm thinking of that he reminds me of, Honeymoon Suite. That's the kind of sound Doesn't sound like Honeymoon Suite. Don't want you to get mistaken thinking that it sounds like Honeymoon Suite. To me is kind of a heavy pop group. This one has a bit of that kind of guitar break, where it breaks the guitar up in the slow, methodical sound, but much heavier, a much heavier sound than that. Yeah, so it's a solid album. Not an album that I would go to too often, because that sound never really interested me. I like my heavy metal, if I like it, and more like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and some of the more screechier bands. But yeah, this is definitely a solid album. You know, I wouldn't turn it off. I actually enjoyed it while I was I had some other stuff to do, and I was listening to it at the same time. And the things I enjoyed the most about the album, the last song was my favorite, the I Am Evil. I think that it very much demonstrated the styles that this band was influenced by. Definitely there was a real Sabbath sound to that song. That probably was the reason I liked it the most. The vocals, of course, I loved. I thought his vocals were fantastic. The guitar sound is kind of a standard metal sound to it. His guitar solos, they were good. They weren't terribly inventive, but they were pretty good. And I thought the bass player was pretty strong at points in time too. Drummer, he was louder, but he kept the beat. He did a good job on that particular aspect of it. I don't think he's an overly creative drummer, but he's not a terrible drummer either. So overall, the band is pretty good. They did have some progressive elements to their music too, which was a little bit different than you get from a lot of these type of bands from that time period, but they definitely had that thing. They could, I guess you might want to classify them as they kind of, because they were British, might say they might be a little bit like the new wave of British heavy metal that came out during that time period. I don't think of them that way, but I guess some people might put them in that category. So there you have it. So that's Diamond Head. Album is called Borrowed Time, released in 1982. Pretty interesting listen. The album cover itself is very good. It exceeds, and I think you get what you see on the album cover. I would have thought a little bit more doomy sounding might be what you were going to get, but definitely strong. If you like that sound, this is a good album, and I recommend just give it a listen. Diamond Head's Borrowed Time. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give your comments on the album below. Like to hear what people think of it. And please subscribe. It's much appreciated. And I do apologize. I know that this is going to come out fairly late tonight. I had a lot of stuff going on today, and I didn't get in until fairly late. So I had listened to the album once, but I wasn't really comfortable with doing any kind of presentation on it. I had to listen to it again, and I had other stuff to do, and so it's going to come out late, but I would rather it come out late and be appreciated than just kind of rush through it and it doesn't sound like I actually listened to it at all. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you next week with another album challenge on Ben's Album Challenge. So take care. Good night.